Dante Blackwood has it all: a thriving tech empire, a luxurious lifestyle, and a reputation as one of the city's most generous philanthropists. But when he's wrongfully detained in front of his peers at a private airport, everything shatters. Arrested and humiliated for a crime he didn't commit, Dante faces a system that sees the color of his skin, not the content of his character. As he fights to clear his name, Dante discovers a web of corruption led by Detective Richard Sloane, a ruthless figure with a personal vendetta against successful black men. With time running out before fabricated evidence ruins his career, Dante must choose: pursue a path of justice or embrace the darkness of revenge. With everything on the line, his empire, his family, and his freedom, Dante takes the fight into his own hands. But the deeper he digs, the darker the secrets he uncovers. In a world where power and prejudice collide, Dante is about to teach them all one brutal lesson: never underestimate a man with nothing left to lose. Fast-paced, explosive, and filled with jaw-dropping twists, The Day Justice Turned Black is a story of vengeance, redemption, and one man's relentless pursuit of truth in the face of systemic corruption. Based on a true story. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you find it compelling, don't forget to hit subscribe. Dante Blackwood leaned back in the plush leather seat of his private jet, savoring a rare moment of quiet. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, glancing out the window at the runway below. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden glow over the tarmac. Today was supposed to be one of the biggest days of his career. If all went as planned, his tech company, Blackwood Innovations, would finalize a partnership that would expand its reach into international markets. "Sir, we're ready for takeoff," his flight attendant, Carla, informed him with a polite smile. "Thank you, Carla," Dante replied, flashing a confident grin. He pulled out his phone to check a few last-minute emails from Maria, his assistant, who had confirmed all the final details of the deal. Everything was falling into place. It was supposed to be a smooth flight to New York where his future awaited. As the jet taxied toward the runway, Dante closed his eyes, mentally rehearsing his presentation. He had spent months preparing for this day. A multi-million-dollar contract that would change everything was within reach. Suddenly, the jet came to an abrupt stop. The sudden jolt sent his phone clattering to the floor. Dante's eyes snapped open, and his heart skipped a beat. What the hell is going on? He muttered under his breath, unbuckling his seatbelt. Before he could reach the cockpit to ask the pilot what was happening, he heard muffled shouting outside. The sound of sirens quickly followed, growing louder. Dante's brows furrowed in confusion. He turned to Carla, who looked equally bewildered. "Sir, it seems there's something happening outside," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Dante moved to the window and peered out. His stomach dropped at the sight. Police cars, their lights flashing, surrounded his jet on all sides. Armed officers poured out, barking orders and pointing their weapons toward the aircraft. "What the hell?" Dante whispered, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He turned to Carla, who stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay calm," he instructed her. "Let me handle this." Before he could take another step, the door of the jet was forcefully opened. A group of officers stormed in, their guns drawn. "Hands in the air." "Now," one of them shouted, his voice booming through the narrow cabin. Dante slowly raised his hands, trying to keep his composure. "There's no need for this," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "I'm the owner of this jet. What's going on? Step out of the plane." Another officer barked, ignoring his question. "Now." Humiliated and confused, Dante had no choice but to comply. He was roughly pulled down the steps of the jet, his polished shoes slipping on the metal as he was dragged onto the tarmac. A crowd had already gathered nearby, with airport staff and passengers gawking at the spectacle. Some had their phones out, recording the scene. "Is this really necessary?" Dante protested as an officer shoved him to the ground. Gravel bit into his palms as he tried to steady himself. He could hear people whispering, their voices blending into a low hum of disbelief. "Dante Blackwood, you're under investigation for alleged financial crimes," came a voice that sent a chill down his spine. Dante looked up to see Detective Richard Sloane, the same officer who had made headlines for taking down high-profile figures in recent years. Sloane was known for his aggressive tactics, especially against wealthy men of color. His cold, blue eyes locked onto Dante's with a look of satisfaction. "This is insane," Dante said, struggling to rise to his feet as two officers pinned him down. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Tell it to the judge," Sloane sneered, signaling to the officers to haul Dante up. "We've got an anonymous tip that you've been laundering money through your company. We're just here to do our jobs." Dante's mind was spinning. Anonymous tip? Laundering money? It was all nonsense, and he knew it. But it was clear Sloane wasn't here to ask questions. He was here to make a show of Dante's arrest. And from the looks of it, he was doing a damn good job. "You're making a mistake," Dante insisted as he was cuffed. His employees, who had been waiting to board the jet, watched in shock. Some of them tried to approach, but officers held them back. "This isn't right." Maria, his assistant, shouted from the crowd. "He's innocent. You can't just." "Back off," an officer warned, pointing his weapon at her. The crowd gasped, and Maria was forced to retreat, tears of frustration in her eyes. As Dante was shoved into the back of a police car, he couldn't shake the feeling of déjà vu. He had seen this kind of public humiliation before, just not from this side of it. He had spent his life playing by the rules, working twice as hard to prove himself in a world that never fully accepted him. The car door slammed shut, sealing him in darkness. The reality of his situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone wanted to ruin him, to destroy everything he had built. As the car pulled away from the runway, Dante stared out at his private jet, the symbol of his success, now surrounded by flashing lights and chaos. Whoever was behind this was trying to make an example out of him. And they were succeeding. But as the precinct came into view, Dante clenched his fists, a spark of determination flaring within him. He didn't know who had orchestrated this attack on his character, but he was going to find out. And when he did, they were going to regret ever coming for him. The squad car jolted as it turned off the highway and pulled into the police precinct. Dante sat in the back seat, his wrists aching from the tight handcuffs that bit into his skin. The past half hour had been a blur of flashing lights, blaring sirens, and the shocked faces of bystanders. Now, as the car came to a stop, the weight of his situation settled heavily on his chest. Dante's mind raced as the officers yanked him out of the car. He had spent years building his empire from the ground up, fighting tooth and nail to prove himself in a world that never seemed to want him at the top. And now, in a matter of minutes, everything was unraveling. As he was marched up the steps of the precinct, he could feel eyes on him. Officers who had paused their conversations to gawk, and others who exchanged knowing smirks. Whispers trailed behind him like a shadow. Dante forced himself to keep his head high, refusing to let them see how shaken he was. They led him into a narrow corridor, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a cold, sterile glow. He could hear the faint hum of phones ringing, the distant clatter of keyboards, and the occasional bark of orders from officers. The cacophony of the police station was a world away from the serene, controlled environment of his boardroom. He was pushed into a small, windowless interrogation room, the door slamming shut behind him with a metallic clang. The room was bare, save for a metal table bolted to the floor and two uncomfortable-looking chairs. The air was thick with the scent of disinfectant and something else, fear, maybe. Dante was left alone, the seconds stretching into minutes. He tried to slow his breathing, forcing himself to focus. Whoever had orchestrated this spectacle clearly wanted to humiliate him, to make an example out of him. But who? And why? The door swung open with a force that rattled the walls. In strode Detective Richard Sloane, his presence filling the small room like a storm cloud. Sloane was a broad-shouldered, grizzled man in his late 40s, with a face that looked like it had seen its fair share of fights. His eyes were cold, almost predatory, as he took a seat across from Dante. "Mr. Blackwood," Sloane began, drawing out the words with a mocking tone. "Quite the morning you're having, isn't it?" Dante said nothing, simply meeting Sloane's gaze with a calm he didn't truly feel. He had dealt with sharks in the boardroom, but this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. "I'm going to cut to the chase," Sloane continued, leaning forward. "We've got credible information that you've been laundering money through your little tech company. Anonymous tips, bank statements that don't quite add up, the whole 9 yards." Dante blinked, stunned. "That's insane," he said, his voice steady despite the surge of panic rising in his chest. "Blackwood Innovations is clean. We've passed every audit. Whatever evidence you think you have, it's fabricated." Sloane chuckled, a deep, unsettling sound that made the hairs on the back of Dante's neck stand up. "You rich boys always think you're untouchable. But let me tell you something, Blackwood, you're not above the law." Dante's jaw clenched. "I want to speak to my lawyer," he said, his tone cold. "You can't hold me here without cause." "Oh, we've got cause," Sloane replied, his smile widening. "But sure, let's get your fancy lawyer involved. Can't wait to see the look on his face when he sees the evidence we have." Sloane stood, rapping his knuckles on the table before turning to leave. "Sit tight, Mr. Blackwood. We'll see if your lawyer can magic you out of this mess." The door slammed behind him, leaving Dante alone once more. As the silence enveloped him, Dante's mind raced. This wasn't just an arrest. It was a calculated move to destroy him. But why? And who was behind it? He couldn't shake the feeling that this went beyond Detective Sloane's disdain for successful black men. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone who had gone to great lengths to bring him down. The door opened again, this time more quietly. Mark Simmons, Dante's lawyer and longtime friend, entered with a grim expression on his face. Mark was usually the picture of confidence, but today he looked rattled. "Dante, what the hell is going on?" Mark asked as he pulled out the chair and sat across from him. "I got a call saying you were being detained for money laundering. What's this all about?" "That's what I'd like to know," Dante replied, his frustration boiling over. "I was dragged off my jet with no explanation. Now Sloane's accusing me of laundering money. This is a setup, Mark." Mark leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I've dealt with Sloane before. He's ruthless, especially when he thinks he has a high-profile target. But I've never seen him move this fast. It's almost like he's got orders from someone higher up." Dante's eyes narrowed. "Orders? You think someone put him up to this?" Mark hesitated, then nodded slowly. "It's possible. Someone who wants to see you taken down, badly." Dante's mind raced. This wasn't just about a personal vendetta from Sloane. Someone powerful was behind this, someone willing to bend the law to ruin him. "Can you get me out of here?" Dante asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm trying," Mark said. "But they've got enough to hold you for 48 hours while they investigate. In the meantime, you need to stay calm and let me handle this." "Stay calm?" Dante shot back, anger flaring. "They're trying to destroy everything I've built, Mark. If we don't figure out who's behind this, it's all over." Mark sighed, looking more uncertain than Dante had ever seen him. "I'll do my best," he said before rising from his seat. But you need to prepare yourself, Dante. This isn't going to be over quickly. As Mark left the room, Dante was once again left alone with his thoughts. The walls seemed to close in around him, the weight of the accusations pressing down like a vice. But beneath the fear and uncertainty, a spark of resolve began to burn. Whoever was behind this had made a grave mistake. They thought they could break him, but Dante Blackwood wasn't going down without a fight. The loud clang of the cell door echoed behind Dante as he stepped out of the police precinct. The cold morning air hit him like a slap, making him realize just how long he had been inside. He was finally free, but the damage had already been done. Reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing as they yelled questions at him. Mr. Blackwood, are the allegations true? Is Blackwood Innovations involved in financial crimes? How do you respond to the accusations? Dante kept his head down, pushing through the throng of reporters. His jaw was set, his mind racing. Mark Simmons, his lawyer, had managed to get him released on bail, but it was clear that this was just the beginning. Whoever was behind this setup had done their homework. They knew exactly how to hit him where it hurt most. A sleek black car was waiting at the curb, and Maria, his loyal assistant, rushed out to meet him. Mr. Blackwood. I've been trying to reach you all night, she said, her voice trembling. Are you okay? Dante nodded tersely. Let's get out of here, he said, climbing into the back seat. Maria quickly followed, and the driver pulled away from the chaotic scene outside the precinct. As they drove through the city, Dante stared out the window, his thoughts a tangled mess. The arrest had thrown his entire world into disarray, but he couldn't afford to dwell on it. He had to figure out who was behind this and why. I don't understand, Maria said, her voice breaking the silence. Everything was fine yesterday. The company was thriving. And then, this. That's exactly what they wanted, Dante replied, rubbing his temples. They wanted to hit us where it would hurt the most, right before the biggest deal of my career. Maria's face went pale. Oh no, the meeting. She exclaimed. We had to cancel the presentation with the European investors. They've been calling non-stop. Dante's heart sank. That meeting was supposed to secure a multi-million-dollar partnership that would expand Blackwood Innovations into Europe. It was the culmination of months of negotiations and planning. And now, it was all slipping through his fingers. How bad is it? Dante asked, turning to Maria. She hesitated, glancing down at her phone. It's not good. Our stock is plummeting. Investors are panicking. And there are rumors circulating that we're involved in some shady financial dealings. Dante clenched his fists, fury bubbling just beneath the surface. Whoever was behind this had planned it perfectly. The arrest, the allegations, the public humiliation, it was all designed to destroy his reputation and his company. Damn it, Dante muttered under his breath. I need to get in front of this. We need to issue a statement. That's not all, Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. I've been monitoring our social media, and, well, it's a mess. The video of your arrest is everywhere. People are already assuming the worst. Dante closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to steady himself. The world he had worked so hard to build was crumbling around him, and it seemed like there was nothing he could do to stop it. The car finally pulled up in front of Blackwood Innovations headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that had been his pride and joy. But as Dante stepped out, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. A crowd had gathered outside, some of them holding signs with phrases like, "Justice for the victims," and, "No more corporate crime." Jesus, Dante muttered. They've turned me into a public enemy overnight. Security guards quickly escorted him through the crowd, shielding him from the angry shouts and flashing cameras. Inside the lobby, things were no better. Employees whispered to one another, their eyes filled with a mix of concern and doubt. It was clear that morale had taken a hit. "Mr. Blackwood," said a voice from behind him. It was Jason Parker, the head of his security team. Jason's face was grim as he pulled Dante aside. "I need to talk to you about something. We've detected unusual activity on our internal networks." "What kind of activity?" Dante asked, trying to keep up as they walked toward his office. "Someone's been accessing sensitive financial records," Jason explained. "At first, we thought it was just a routine audit, but the timing is suspicious." Dante's mind went into overdrive. "You're saying someone inside the company could be feeding information to the police?" "It's possible," Jason said, his tone cautious. "We're still investigating, but whoever it is, they've covered their tracks well." Dante pushed open the door to his office and sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The elegant space that once felt like a haven now seemed cold and uninviting. Maria placed a stack of urgent reports on his desk, her eyes filled with concern. "We're bleeding money, Dante," she said softly. "If we don't get ahead of this, the board might consider stepping in. They're already questioning your leadership." A bitter laugh escaped Dante's lips. "So, that's the plan, huh? Take me down and have the board replace me with someone more reliable? They must think they've already won." "No," Maria said firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "They haven't won yet. We can fight this." Dante looked at her, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. "You're right," he said, sitting up straighter. "We're not going to let them take us down without a fight. First, we need to find out who's behind this." "Jason's team is already looking into the breach," Maria said. "But in the meantime, you need to address the public. We have to get ahead of the narrative." Dante nodded. "Schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. We're going to clear my name, and we're going to do it on my terms." But as Maria turned to leave, Jason reappeared, looking more concerned than before. "Sir, we've just discovered something else," he said, handing Dante a file. "It looks like one of our top employees has been accessing restricted files without authorization." Dante flipped through the file, his eyes narrowing. "Who?" he demanded. Jason hesitated before saying, "It's Mark Simmons. Your lawyer." Dante's blood ran cold. The man he had trusted to protect him was now a suspect. This betrayal cut deeper than he could have imagined. Dante paced the length of his office, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of everything Jason had just told him. Betrayal was the last thing he expected from Mark Simmons, his lawyer and trusted confidant. Mark had been by his side through countless negotiations and legal battles, always a steady presence in Dante's tumultuous rise to the top. But now, the evidence in front of him told a different story. The file Jason had handed him was filled with records of suspicious activity, bank statements, email correspondences, and timestamps showing that Mark had been accessing sensitive financial data over the past few weeks. Data that could easily have been twisted and leaked to the authorities to frame Dante. Dante clenched his fists, his thoughts swirling. Could Mark really have sold him out? And if so, why? Was it for money? Influence? Or was someone else pulling the strings? The door to his office opened, and Maria stepped in, her expression tense. "I've scheduled the press conference for tomorrow morning," she said. "We'll have to tread carefully. The media is already spinning this in the worst possible light." "Thanks, Maria," Dante said, trying to muster a reassuring smile. But he could see the concern in her eyes. She was one of the few people he could still trust, and he needed her now more than ever. "Anything new from Jason?" Maria asked, glancing at the file on Dante's desk. Dante nodded grimly. "It's worse than I thought. Mark's been accessing confidential files. If he's working with the authorities or someone else, they've got everything they need to bring us down." Maria's eyes widened. Mark? But why would he? I don't know, Dante cut in, his voice raw with frustration. But I'm going to find out. Before Maria could respond, Dante's phone buzzed. The caller ID showed it was Mark himself. Dante hesitated for a moment, then picked up. Mark, he said, trying to keep his voice steady, we need to talk. Now. Dante, I was just about to call you, Mark said, his voice smooth and collected. I heard you were released on bail. How are you holding up? Cut the crap, Mark, Dante snapped, unable to keep the anger out of his voice. We need to meet. There's something we need to discuss, face to face. There was a brief pause on the other end. All right, I'll be at your office in 20 minutes, Mark finally replied, his tone cautious. Dante hung up, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he knew he needed answers. If Mark was betraying him, Dante needed to hear it directly from his so-called friend's lips. 20 minutes later, Mark walked into Dante's office, his expression calm and unreadable. He was impeccably dressed as always, with his dark suit perfectly tailored and his hair slicked back. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of unease that Dante hadn't noticed before. Dante, you look like hell, Mark said with a concerned frown as he took a seat. I've been trying to get ahead of this mess, but it's moving fast. The media is eating it up. Dante didn't bother with pleasantries. He leaned forward, fixing Mark with a cold, unyielding stare. I need to ask you something, Mark, and I want the truth. Are you working against me? Mark's eyes widened, but he quickly composed himself. What? Dante, no. I've been on your side since day one. Who put that idea in your head? Dante threw the file onto the desk, the pages spilling out like an accusation. Then explain this. Explain why you've been accessing confidential financial records without authorization. Records that only a handful of people, including myself, should have access to. Mark's face went pale, his composure slipping for the first time. Dante, I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Then start talking, Dante growled. Because right now, it looks like you've been feeding information to someone who wants to ruin me. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the file. I had to look into the accounts, Dante, because I was worried. I heard rumors that someone inside your company was planning something. I was trying to protect you. Dante's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing. And you didn't think to tell me? You went behind my back instead? I couldn't risk it, Mark replied, his voice barely above a whisper. If I was wrong, would have ruined everything we've built. But if I was right, well, I needed to be sure before I came to you. Dante studied him, trying to read between the lines. Mark's story made sense, but it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain why the authorities had shown up at his jet with such precise timing, or why the evidence against him seemed to be meticulously orchestrated. Let's say I believe you, Dante said slowly, then who the hell is behind all this? Who's trying to take me down? Mark hesitated, his eyes darting away for a moment. There are powerful people, Dante, people who don't like how successful you've become. I've been hearing whispers about competitors who feel threatened by Blackwood innovations. Names, Mark. I need names, Dante demanded. Before Mark could respond, Jason burst into the office, his expression urgent. Sir, we've got a problem, he said, ignoring Mark completely. The media has gotten hold of internal documents that weren't supposed to be public. It's all over the news. What documents? Dante asked, his heart sinking. Jason handed him a tablet, showing a live news report. The headline read, Blackwood Innovations under investigation, leaked documents suggest financial misconduct. Dante's blood ran cold. How the hell did this get out? Mark stood up, looking genuinely shocked. I swear, Dante, I had nothing to do with this. Someone's playing us both. Dante slammed his fist on the desk. Then find out who, Mark. Because if I find out you're lying to me, I swear. I'm on it, Mark said quickly, backing toward the door. I'll track down whoever leaked this. I promise. As Mark left, Dante turned to Jason. Keep an eye on him, he ordered. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. Jason nodded. Already on it, sir. We'll get to the bottom of this. As the door closed, Dante leaned back in his chair, feeling more exhausted than ever. The walls seemed to be closing in on him, the weight of betrayal and suspicion bearing down like a crushing tide. Whoever was behind this wasn't just targeting his company, they were coming for him personally. And if he didn't find out who was pulling the strings soon, everything he had built would come crashing down. Dante's office felt like a battlefield. The tension was thick in the air, a mixture of anger, betrayal, and raw determination. He had to figure out who was trying to ruin him, but as much as he tried to keep his composure, the walls seemed to be closing in. He had to make a move, and fast. Maria had left to coordinate the upcoming press conference, and Jason was busy running checks on Mark. That left Dante alone in his office, the faint sounds of ringing phones and hushed conversations from the rest of his staff drifting through the closed door. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the city skyline outside his window, trying to piece together the puzzle. But every lead felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He was tired of waiting, tired of being on the defensive. He needed someone who could help him get ahead of whoever was behind this, but not someone within the system, not someone who could be bought or manipulated. That's when he remembered Malik. Malik Johnson wasn't just an old friend, he was a survivor of the same tough neighborhood where Dante had grown up. But while Dante had escaped that life through hard work and business acumen, Malik had taken a different path. He was a former street hustler turned private investigator, someone who knew how to navigate the darker corners of the city. Malik owed Dante a favor, a big one. Dante picked up his phone and dialed the number he hadn't used in years. The line rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Well, if it isn't the great Dante Blackwood, Malik said with a chuckle. What's a billionaire like you doing calling a street rat like me? I'm in trouble, Malik, Dante replied without preamble. I need your help. The line went silent for a moment, then Malik's voice came back, serious. All right, where do you want to meet? An hour later, Dante found himself sitting in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place that Dante would never be caught dead in on a normal day, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The stale scent of cigarettes and cheap liquor filled the air, and the patrons kept their eyes to themselves, ignoring the well-dressed man in the corner booth. Malik slid into the seat across from Dante, his leather jacket creaking as he leaned back. He was the same as Dante remembered, lean, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. You must really be in deep if you're reaching out to me, Malik said, giving Dante a once-over. I saw the news. The media's having a field day with your little arrest. Dante leaned in, lowering his voice. This isn't just about the media, Malik. Someone's trying to destroy me, and I don't think it's just Detective Sloane. I need someone on the outside who can dig into this without getting caught. Malik raised an eyebrow. You've got all the resources in the world, Dante. Why come to me? Because I can't trust anyone in my circle right now, Dante replied, his voice laced with frustration. I need someone who's not tied to my company, someone who knows how to operate in the shadows. Malik nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he considered Dante's words. All right, I'm in. But I'll need more than just a sob story. Who do you think is behind this? I don't know for sure, Dante admitted, rubbing his temples. But I've got suspicions. My lawyer, Mark, might be involved. He's been accessing confidential files without authorization. And then there's Sloane, he's got a personal vendetta against me. But it feels bigger than that. Like someone's pulling their strings. Malik whistled softly. A double-crossing lawyer and a dirty cop. Sounds like you've pissed off the wrong people. Dante leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. I need you to dig into Mark, Sloane, and anyone else connected to them. Whoever's behind this has resources. They're not just targeting me, they're going after my company, my reputation, everything I've built. Malik's expression turned serious. All right. But this won't be easy. If they've got someone like Sloane on their payroll, they're not playing by the rules. Just find me something, Dante said, his voice taut with urgency. Anything I can use to fight back. Malik nodded, slipping a small notepad from his jacket and scribbling down a few notes. I'll start digging. But you need to be careful, Dante. The streets are talking, and the word is that someone powerful wants you taken down hard. I don't scare easily, Malik, Dante replied, though he could feel the tension in his chest tightening like a vice. But I need results, and I need them fast. If we don't get ahead of this, it's all over. Malik gave him a grim smile. Don't worry. I've got your back. But if I'm going to do this, I'll need access to your network, secure channels, encrypted emails, the works. Consider it done, Dante said. I'll have Maria set you up. Malik slipped out of the booth as quietly as he had arrived. I'll be in touch, he said before disappearing into the smoky haze of the bar. As Dante walked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into deeper waters than he'd ever navigated before. But he couldn't afford to back down now. He had built his empire from nothing, and he wasn't going to let it crumble because of some hidden enemy. He pulled out his phone and called Maria. I've brought in Malik, he said as soon as she answered. Get him whatever he needs. And I want updates on Mark's movements, every call, every email. Got it, Maria replied. But you should know, there's been another development. Dante's heart skipped a beat. What is it? One of our major investors just pulled out, she said, her voice tight with worry. They're citing unresolved legal issues as the reason. If this keeps up, we could lose more investors by the end of the day. Dante closed his eyes, leaning against the cold metal of his car. They were coming at him from every angle. But now, with Malik on his side, he had a fighting chance. All right, thanks, Maria. Keep me updated, he said before hanging up. As the city lights flickered on in the gathering dusk, Dante felt a steely resolve settle over him. The game had changed, but he wasn't going down without a fight. Whoever was behind this had underestimated him. And now, he had an ally who could help him fight back on their level. The gloves were off. Dante sat in the dimly lit conference room of Blackwood Innovations, his gaze locked on the projection screen in front of him. The blinds were drawn, casting the room into shadows, while the faint hum of the air conditioning was the only sound that filled the space. He was surrounded by his most trusted staff, Maria, Jason, and a few of his top executives. Malik had just sent over the results of his investigation, and Dante had called this emergency meeting to review the findings. He hadn't even had time to change out of his wrinkled suit from the night before. Exhaustion clung to him like a shadow, but he couldn't afford to rest. Not when everything was on the line. Maria clicked on the play button, and the screen came to life with grainy security footage. Malik had managed to dig up something Dante hadn't expected. The video was time-stamped from 2 weeks ago and showed Mark Simmons, his lawyer, meeting with a man in a dark alleyway. Is that who I think it is? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. The figure in the video was unmistakable. It was Detective Richard Sloane, the same man who had orchestrated his arrest. The two men were exchanging what appeared to be documents. Pause it there, Dante said, his voice tight. The screen froze, showing Sloane handing Mark a thick envelope. Dante's stomach churned. This was more than just a betrayal, it was a carefully orchestrated setup. Malik cross-referenced the location, Jason said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. It's the same spot where the anonymous tip supposedly came from. Mark and Sloane were working together from the beginning. Dante clenched his fists. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place. Mark, the man he had trusted for years, had been feeding information to Sloane. They had planned this entire thing together, setting Dante up to take the fall. The allegations, the arrest, the media circus, it had all been designed to destroy him. Is there any way we can prove this was a setup? Dante asked, turning to Jason. We have the footage, Jason said. But it's not enough on its own. They could claim it was taken out of context, that it was just a regular meeting. We need more. Dante nodded slowly, his mind racing. What about the financial records? Can we link them back to Mark? Maria cleared her throat. That's where things get tricky, she said. Malik found evidence that someone has been moving money through offshore accounts, but it's well hidden. Whoever's behind this knows how to cover their tracks. Let me guess, Dante said, a bitter edge to his voice. The trail leads back to me, doesn't it? Maria nodded. Yes, but the transactions were timed perfectly with your legitimate business dealings. It's like they were mirroring your financial activity to make it look like you were involved. A heavy silence settled over the room as the weight of the situation sank in. Dante felt like he was staring into the abyss, the realization that everything he had built could be torn down in an instant. But as much as he wanted to lash out, he knew that anger wouldn't solve anything. He needed to be smart. All right, Dante said, standing up. We need to flip this script. If Mark and Sloane are working together, we need to find a way to turn them against each other. How do we do that? Jason asked. Dante's eyes narrowed as a plan began to form. We need leverage. Something that will make them turn on each other. If we can convince one of them that the other is about to sell them out, they'll crack. Maria nodded, already typing furiously on her laptop. I can set up a secure line to Malik. Maybe he can find something we can use. As Maria worked, Dante's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw Mark's name on the caller ID. It's him, Dante said, holding up the phone for everyone to see. Let's see what he has to say. He hit the speaker button, and Mark's voice filled the room. Dante, we need to talk. I've been looking into the allegations, and, well, there's something you need to know. Dante's jaw clenched. Go on, he said, keeping his tone even. I'm listening. Mark hesitated, and Dante could hear the tension in his voice. I've been approached by someone, Dante. Someone powerful. They wanted me to turn against you, to feed them information. You don't say, Dante replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And let me guess, you did exactly that. There was a long pause on the other end. I didn't have a choice, Mark finally said, his voice barely a whisper. They threatened to ruin my career, my life. I didn't want to, but I had to protect myself. Dante exchanged a look with Maria and Jason. This was the opening they needed. Mark, if you really want to make things right, you're going to have to help me, Dante said, pouring as much sincerity as he could into his voice. Turn on them, and I can protect you. I don't know if I can, Mark replied, panic creeping into his tone. Sloane, he's dangerous. If he finds out I'm talking to you. Listen to me, Mark, Dante cut in. They're using you just like they're trying to use me. If we don't take them down now, they'll destroy both of us. But if you help me, I can get you immunity. You just have to trust me. The line went silent, and for a moment, Dante feared that Mark had hung up. But then, in a barely audible voice, Mark said, "All right. I'll send you everything I have. But you need to promise me protection." "You have my word," Dante said, trying to mask the satisfaction in his voice. "Get the files to Maria, and we'll take it from there." The call ended, and Dante turned to his team. "We've got him," he said, a triumphant smile breaking through the tension. "Now, let's see if we can use this to take Sloane down." As they prepared to sift through whatever files Mark would send, Dante felt the first real spark of hope since this nightmare had begun. They had found a crack in the armor, and now it was time to drive a wedge between Mark and Sloane. The game had just changed, and Dante was no longer playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. The sound of sirens blared in the distance as Dante stepped out of Blackwood Innovations headquarters. The evening air was cold and heavy, pressing against him like an invisible weight. After everything that had happened today, he needed a moment to clear his head. The conversation with Mark had provided a sliver of hope, but it also meant that he was in deeper trouble than he had imagined. If Mark was willing to flip, it meant that whatever forces were targeting him were powerful enough to terrify even the most well-connected lawyer. As he headed toward the parking lot, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Malik. "We need to meet. Now. Found something big. Usual spot." Dante's pulse quickened. Malik had been digging into Sloane and Mark's activities, and if he was reaching out this urgently, it had to be serious. He quickly texted back, "On my way." He climbed into his car, his mind racing. If Malik had uncovered something substantial, it could be the breakthrough they needed. Dante navigated through the city streets, heading toward the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town where he and Malik had agreed to meet. It was a place where no one would look for them, a relic of their shared past. When Dante arrived, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the crumbling building. He killed the engine and stepped out of the car, scanning the area. The warehouse loomed like a ghost in the night, its broken windows reflecting the last light of day. Malik was already there, waiting near the entrance, his silhouette barely visible in the darkness. "Malik," Dante called out, his voice low. "What did you find?" Malik turned, his expression grim. "We've got a serious problem, Dante. Someone's been watching you, and not just Sloane. There's another player involved." "What do you mean?" Dante asked, a chill running down his spine. "Who else is in on this?" Malik pulled out a tablet and swiped through a series of files. "I hacked into some encrypted communications between Mark and Sloane. It turns out they've been receiving orders from someone higher up, a powerful figure in the financial sector." Dante's stomach sank. "So this isn't just about taking me down. It's about controlling the market." "Exactly," Malik said, his voice tense. "Whoever's behind this wants your company's assets. If they can destroy your reputation and force you out, they'll swoop in and buy everything at a fraction of the price." Dante rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on him. "Do we have a name?" "Not yet," Malik replied, frustration etched on his face. "But we're close. I intercepted a message that's set to go live tomorrow. It's an all-out smear campaign. They're planning to release doctored financial reports, claiming that Blackwood Innovations has been involved in fraudulent activities." "Damn it," Dante muttered under his breath. "We're running out of time. If those reports go public, we're finished." As they spoke, a sudden noise from the shadows caught Dante's attention. He turned just in time to see a group of masked men emerging from the darkness, guns drawn. "Get down!" Malik shouted, shoving Dante behind a stack of crates as gunfire erupted. The air filled with the deafening roar of bullets and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Dante's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched behind cover. The attackers were well trained, moving in formation as they advanced. Whoever sent them wasn't just trying to scare him, they wanted him dead. Malik pulled out a handgun from his jacket, returning fire. "We've been set up," he yelled over the noise. "They must have traced my hack." Dante's mind raced. If they didn't get out of here fast, they'd be cornered. "We need to move," he shouted, glancing toward a side exit. "Cover me." Malik nodded, firing a few more shots to keep the attackers pinned down. Dante bolted toward the door, his lungs burning as he sprinted through the darkness. Malik was right behind him, but as they reached the exit, one of the masked men lunged out of the shadows, tackling Dante to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The attacker was strong, pressing a knee into Dante's chest as he tried to pull a knife from his belt. But Dante wasn't about to go down without a fight. Summoning every ounce of strength, he twisted, slamming his elbow into the man's face. The attacker staggered back, and Dante scrambled to his feet, kicking the knife away. "Let's go!" Malik shouted, grabbing Dante's arm. They burst through the door into the cold night air, the sounds of gunfire still echoing behind them. They didn't stop running until they reached Dante's car. "Get in!" Dante barked, throwing himself into the driver's seat. Malik barely had time to shut the door before Dante floored the accelerator, the tires screeching as they sped away from the warehouse. The ride back to the city was tense and silent, both men catching their breath. Finally, Malik spoke, his voice ragged. "This is bigger than we thought, Dante. These people are willing to kill to protect their secrets." Dante tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing. Whoever was orchestrating this wasn't just targeting his company, they were willing to spill blood to get what they wanted. He couldn't afford to keep playing defense. "Thanks for saving my ass back there," Dante said, glancing over at Malik. "I owe you." Malik shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. But if we're going to take these bastards down, we need to be smart. We can't trust anyone, not even your inner circle." Dante nodded, his mind already working on their next move. "We need proof, something that ties these people to the attacks, the smear campaign, everything." Malik sighed. "I'll keep digging, but we're running out of time. They're going to release those fake reports tomorrow morning. Then we need to act fast," Dante said, determination hardening his voice. "We're going to turn this around. If they want a war, I'll give them one." As they sped through the city streets, Dante's resolve solidified. His enemies had shown their hand, and now it was his turn to strike back. He wasn't just fighting for his company anymore, he was fighting for his life. Dante stormed into his office at Blackwood Innovations, still shaken from the ambush at the warehouse. The adrenaline from the gunfight had kept him wired through the night, but now, as the first light of dawn crept into the sky, exhaustion tugged at his every muscle. Yet, he had no time to rest. Malik's revelation about the impending smear campaign had left him with only a few hours to act. He found Maria waiting for him inside, her expression grim. "We've got a serious problem," she said, her voice barely masking the urgency she felt. "The media is already hinting at a major financial scandal involving Blackwood Innovations. We're running out of time." "Damn it," Dante muttered under his breath. "I thought we had until morning. How are they moving so fast?" "Whoever's behind this has been planning it for a long time," Maria replied, handing him a tablet. "I've been monitoring social media and news outlets. It looks like they're ready to drop the bomb any minute now." Dante rubbed his tired eyes. "We need to stop this before it goes public. Did you hear back from Mark? Is he sending the files we need?" Maria hesitated, avoiding his gaze. "No, we haven't received anything from him yet. And there's more. Jason wants to see you. He says it's urgent." Dante's stomach tightened. After everything they had been through, he wasn't sure he was ready for more surprises. "All right, send him in," he said, sinking into his chair, trying to prepare himself for whatever was coming next. Jason entered the room, his face a mask of seriousness. He closed the door behind him and walked straight up to Dante's desk, dropping a stack of papers in front of him. "Sir, I've been digging into our internal network logs, like you asked," he began. "And I found something that doesn't make sense." "What is it?" Dante asked, leaning forward. Jason spread the documents out. "Someone inside our company has been accessing sensitive financial files that were used to frame you for money laundering. I traced the access point, and it's coming from someone with top-level clearance." Dante's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying it's one of my senior executives?" Jason shook his head, his eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and anger. "No. It's coming from Mark Simmons' access credentials, but here's the catch: Mark's account was being used remotely. It was hacked." "What?" Dante exclaimed, his mind racing to keep up. "How could that be possible?" Jason took a deep breath. "I checked the timestamps, and they coincide with times when Mark was supposedly meeting with you or handling legal matters. There's no way he could have been in two places at once." Dante's thoughts spun. If Mark's credentials had been compromised, then the narrative he had believed, that Mark was betraying him, might not be true. But if it wasn't Mark accessing those files, then who was it? Jason's face grew even more serious. "I have a name," he said, sliding another document across the desk. "The access was traced back to one of our own, Jason Parker." Dante's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, you?" he asked, incredulity lacing his voice. "No, not me," Jason said quickly. "Someone has been using my credentials too. They were trying to cover their tracks by making it look like I was involved. Whoever this is, they've been playing us against each other, Dante. They've been using us as pawns in their game." Dante stared at the evidence, his mind racing. This changed everything. The real betrayer had been manipulating them from the shadows, using Mark and Jason as scapegoats. But if it's not you or Mark, then who the hell is behind this? Before Jason could answer, Maria burst into the room, her eyes wide with panic. "Sir, we've just received an email from Mark. It's encrypted, but I managed to crack it." She handed Dante a printout, her hands shaking. Dante scanned the document, his breath catching in his throat. The email was a desperate plea from Mark, warning him that someone inside Blackwood Innovations had been orchestrating the entire setup from the beginning. Mark had discovered the truth but was now on the run, fearing for his life. "They're coming after me," the email read. "I found out who's behind this. It's Jason." Dante's head snapped up to look at Jason, who was already backing away, his hands raised defensively. "No, that's not true. They're framing me," Jason insisted, his voice rising. "Think about it, Dante. If I were behind this, why would I bring you this evidence?" Dante's mind whirled with confusion and fury. He was surrounded by half-truths and betrayals, and he couldn't tell who to trust anymore. But one thing was clear: someone was lying, and he needed to find out who. "Both of you, enough!" Dante shouted, slamming his hands on the desk. "Jason, Maria, lock down the building. No one leaves until we figure this out." Jason nodded, looking both relieved and fearful, before rushing out of the office. Maria remained behind, her eyes never leaving Dante's. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Dante took a deep breath, trying to think clearly despite the chaos swirling around him. "We need to get in touch with Mark again. If he's running, he might have proof that can clear this up. And we need to figure out who's been accessing those files. Whoever it is, they've got control over our entire system." Maria nodded, but before she could respond, Dante's phone buzzed again. It was a notification from an anonymous source. His eyes widened as he read the message. "If you want the truth, meet me at the old pier at midnight. Come alone, or you'll never see Mark again." Dante's heart pounded. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. But it also meant walking into a trap, one that could end everything if he wasn't careful. "Maria, I need you to stay here and keep an eye on everything," he said, grabbing his coat. "I'm going to end this, one way or another." Maria's eyes widened with fear. "Dante, you can't go alone. It's too dangerous." "I don't have a choice," Dante replied, his voice hard with resolve. "If they have Mark, he's the only one who can prove who's really behind all this. And I'm done playing defense." With that, Dante strode out of his office, his mind set on the confrontation that awaited him. As he stepped into the elevator, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. But he pushed the thought aside. It was time to bring this game to an end, once and for all. The city was shrouded in darkness as Dante's black SUV sped through the empty streets. The clock on the dashboard blinked 11:45 p.m. He had only 15 minutes to reach the old pier where the anonymous source had instructed him to meet. The message still echoed in his mind: "If you want the truth, meet me at the old pier at midnight. Come alone, or you'll never see Mark again." The stakes had never been higher. His enemies were closing in, and if he couldn't get to the bottom of this conspiracy, everything he had built would crumble. But Dante couldn't shake the feeling that he was heading straight into a trap. As the SUV pulled up to the deserted waterfront, the cold night air bit at Dante's face. The sound of waves crashing against the pier filled the silence. The area was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of the city in the background. Dante's senses were on high alert. He was armed, but he knew that if this was a setup, he was vastly outnumbered. Stepping out of the car, Dante scanned the shadows. "All right, I'm here," he called out, his voice echoing off the rusted shipping containers. "Where's Mark?" There was no response at first, only the sound of the wind whipping through the abandoned docks. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Malik, his old friend and ally. But something was off, the tension in Malik's posture was palpable. "Malik? What the hell are you doing here?" Dante asked, confusion knitting his brows. Malik approached slowly, his face shadowed under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. "Dante, I told you to trust me," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "But things have changed." "What are you talking about?" Dante demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you find Mark?" Before Malik could respond, headlights blazed from behind, illuminating the pier. Dante turned just in time to see several black SUVs screech to a halt. Armed men poured out, forming a semicircle around him and Malik. At their center stood Detective Richard Sloane, his cold eyes glinting with triumph. Well, Mr. Blackwood," Sloane said, stepping forward with a smug grin. "I must say, you're a hard man to catch. But it looks like your luck has finally run out." Dante's heart sank. He had walked straight into their trap. But he couldn't let them see his fear. "What is this, Sloane? You can't keep doing this." "The world is watching," Dante spat, trying to buy time. "Oh, but they are watching," Sloane said with a sinister smile. He raised a hand, and one of his men stepped forward with a tablet. On the screen, a live video feed was broadcasting directly to several major news networks. Dante's stomach twisted. They were broadcasting this confrontation live. If they managed to frame him here, it would be the final nail in his coffin. He had to think fast. Sloane continued, his voice booming for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing the end of a criminal empire. Dante Blackwood has been using his company as a front for laundering money and orchestrating financial fraud. Tonight, we're bringing him to justice." But before Sloane could continue his monologue, Malik stepped forward. "That's enough, Sloane," he said, his voice steady despite the guns trained on him. You've already played your hand. It's time the world knows the truth. Dante turned to Malik, confusion and hope mingling in his eyes. Malik, what are you doing? Malik reached into his jacket, pulling out a small USB drive. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you earlier, Dante. I had to gain their trust to get this. He tossed the USB drive to Dante, who caught it reflexively. What's on this? Dante asked, his mind racing. Proof, Malik said, turning to face the cameras. Proof that Detective Sloane and his associates have been manipulating the justice system, fabricating evidence, and framing innocent people like Dante Blackwood for their own gain. The crowd of onlookers that had gathered beyond the police barricades erupted in gasps. Sloane's face twisted with rage. You idiot, he shouted, lunging for Malik. But it was too late. Dante quickly connected the USB drive to his phone, projecting the files onto the live feed. The screens lit up with documents, emails, and surveillance footage showing Sloane and his co-conspirators discussing how they would frame Dante. The evidence was damning, and the media was eating it up. You think this will save you? Sloane snarled, his voice filled with venom. I can still bury you, Blackwood. But Dante was already 2 steps ahead. Not this time, Sloane, he said, his voice calm and measured. This live feed is being mirrored across every major news outlet. Even if you take me down, the world knows what you've done. The police who had been watching the scene unfold began to murmur among themselves. The public pressure was mounting, and even Sloane's own men looked uncertain. Desperate, Sloane pulled his gun, pointing it directly at Dante. You should have stayed down, Blackwood, he screamed, his voice cracking under the pressure. Before Sloane could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out. But it wasn't from Sloane's weapon. Malik had drawn his concealed firearm, shooting the gun out of Sloane's hand. The detective screamed in pain, clutching his bleeding hand. The police officers, now unsure who to follow, began to lower their weapons. A few stepped forward to restrain Sloane, who was now screaming about conspiracies and betrayal. As the chaos unfolded, Dante turned to Malik. You saved my life, he said, still trying to process everything. Malik gave a tired smile. I told you, Dante. I've got your back. Now let's make sure these bastards pay for what they've done. The police began arresting Sloane and his men as the crowd cheered. Dante could hardly believe it. The evidence Malik had gathered was already spreading across social media like wildfire. Within minutes, the narrative had flipped. Dante was no longer the villain, he was the hero who had exposed corruption at the highest levels. Back at Blackwood Innovations, Maria watched the live feed with a mixture of relief and disbelief. He did it, she whispered to herself. He actually did it. As the adrenaline finally began to ebb, Dante realized just how exhausted he was. But there was no time to rest yet. He still had to clean up the mess his enemies had made and ensure that Blackwood Innovations would survive this storm. But for now, at least, the worst was over. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a stunning display of opulence, filled with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over the sea of well-dressed guests mingling and toasting with champagne flutes. The annual charity gala was in full swing, with journalists, politicians, and CEOs in attendance. The air was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft notes of a live jazz band. But for Dante Blackwood, the glittering scene was nothing more than a facade. Behind his composed exterior, he was on edge. After the events of the past few days, he knew that this night was critical. He was here to rebuild his reputation, to show the world that Blackwood Innovations was back on its feet. But beneath the surface, another plan was unfolding. As Dante stood near the bar, surveying the room, Maria approached him, her expression serious. Everything set, she whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. Malik confirmed that the files are ready to be released. All we need is your signal. Dante nodded subtly, his eyes never leaving the crowd. Good. Once the governor finishes his speech, we'll make our move. We can't afford any slip-ups tonight. The past few days had been a whirlwind. The evidence Malik had exposed had thrown Detective Sloane behind bars, but Dante knew the game was far from over. His enemies were still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And tonight, they would be here, masked by the elegance and glamour of the city's elite. Dante's gaze swept over the room until it landed on Governor Bradley, who was currently holding court at the center of the room. The governor had always been a staunch ally of Sloane's, and Dante suspected that he was the final piece of the puzzle. If he could expose Bradley's involvement in the conspiracy, it would deal a fatal blow to the network that had tried to destroy him. As the band paused, a hush fell over the room, and all eyes turned toward the stage where Governor Bradley was preparing to give his speech. Dante's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that the next few minutes could determine everything. The plan was simple: expose Bradley with irrefutable evidence in front of the city's most powerful figures, all while live-streaming the reveal to millions watching online. Bradley smiled as he took the podium, adjusting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight to support our cause," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "It's an honor to stand before you in this celebration of generosity and unity." Dante's hand tightened around the small remote in his pocket. With a single press, Malik would release the damning files showing the governor's secret dealings with Sloane, Mark, and their shadowy benefactors. But he had to wait for the perfect moment. One misstep, and it would all backfire. Maria was standing nearby, her eyes locked on Dante, waiting for the signal. But before he could give it, Dante's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Malik: "We have a problem. The files are compromised." Dante's heart skipped a beat. He quickly typed back, "What do you mean compromised?" The response was instant: "Someone hacked our system. They've altered the files. If you release them now, it'll look like you fabricated the evidence." A cold wave of dread washed over Dante. This was the final play of his enemies. They had anticipated his move and sabotaged the very evidence he was counting on to expose the governor. He could feel the room closing in on him as the stakes escalated. But there was no turning back. The governor was wrapping up his speech, and the moment for action was now or never. "Dante," Maria whispered urgently, "what do we do? Everyone's watching." Dante's mind raced. If he released the files now, it would destroy him. But if he did nothing, the governor would continue his speech, solidifying his power and influence. Then, an idea sparked. He couldn't expose the governor with the files, but he still had one final card to play. He stepped forward, interrupting the applause that had erupted at the conclusion of Bradley's speech. "Excuse me, Governor Bradley," Dante called out, his voice clear and commanding. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "Mr. Blackwood," the governor said, masking his surprise with a smile. "To what do we owe the honor?" Dante walked up to the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but there is something the people of this city need to know." He took a deep breath, his mind racing to adapt to the changing situation. "I had planned to reveal documents proving corruption at the highest levels tonight, but it appears my files have been tampered with." A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Dante saw the governor's smile waver. He pressed on, improvising. "However, the truth always finds a way. And while my files may have been compromised, there's one thing that cannot be altered: the words of those who have conspired against us." He nodded subtly to Maria, who tapped into the hotel's audio system. A hidden recording began to play over the speakers. It was a conversation between the governor and Detective Sloane, discussing how they had planned to bring Dante down and seize control of his company. The room erupted in gasps. Dante had recorded the conversation during one of his meetings with Malik, knowing it could come in handy if everything else failed. The governor's face turned ashen as the recording continued, exposing his dirty dealings for everyone to hear. "Turn that off," Bradley shouted, his composure cracking as he tried to signal his security. But it was too late. Journalists were already recording, their cameras flashing as they captured the governor's downfall. The live stream was broadcasting every second of it to the world. As the recording ended, Dante took a step back, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. "The people of this city deserve leaders who are honest and just," he said, his voice steady. "Not those who use their power to manipulate and destroy." A roar of applause erupted from the audience, and in that instant, Dante knew he had won. The governor's security team moved in to escort Bradley out, but not before a dozen reporters surrounded him, bombarding him with questions. Backstage, Malik appeared, his eyes wide with relief. "That was a hell of a gamble, Dante," he said, clapping him on the back. "I thought we were finished when the files got corrupted." Dante managed a tired smile. "Sometimes, the best evidence isn't on paper, it's in their own words." Maria joined them, tears of relief in her eyes. "You did it, Dante. We turned it around." But as Dante stood there, watching the chaos unfold, he knew that while this battle was over, the war wasn't yet won. There were still powerful enemies in the shadows, and he had made even more tonight. But for now, he had dealt a significant blow to those who had tried to ruin him. Tonight, Dante Blackwood had taken his reputation back. The fallout from the charity gala was immediate and explosive. By morning, every major news outlet was airing the audio recordings of Governor Bradley's conspiracy with Detective Sloane. Social media was ablaze with commentary, hashtags like #ExposeTheCorrupt and #BlackwoodRises trending worldwide. The city's political landscape was thrown into turmoil, and Dante Blackwood had gone from being a pariah to a hero almost overnight. But Dante had no time to celebrate. He knew that exposing the governor was only part of the battle. The puppet masters who had orchestrated this conspiracy were still lurking in the shadows, and he needed to root them out before they struck again. Dante sat in his office, reviewing the flood of messages pouring in. Offers of support from investors, apologies from those who had doubted him, and pleas from former partners who now wanted back in. Maria and Malik were working in the adjacent room, trying to sift through the chaos and prioritize what needed immediate attention. Suddenly, the office door burst open, and in strode Jason Parker, his head of security, looking disheveled and out of breath. "Dante, we need to talk, now," Jason said, his tone urgent. Dante raised an eyebrow. "What's going on, Jason? I thought we were done with surprises." Jason shut the door behind him, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It's about Mark. We've got a problem." "What now?" Dante asked, his patience wearing thin. He had thought the chapter with Mark was closed, especially after Malik had cleared his name and revealed that Mark's access credentials had been hacked. But Jason's expression told him otherwise. Jason took a deep breath. "Mark was found this morning, badly beaten and barely conscious. He was dumped in an alley downtown. The police have him under guard at the hospital." Dante's eyes widened. "What? Who did this to him?" "That's the thing," Jason said, lowering his voice. "Before he passed out, Mark kept saying that it was someone on your team, someone you trust. He was trying to warn us." A cold dread washed over Dante. "Someone on my team? That's impossible. Malik and Maria are the only ones who have been with me through this whole mess." Jason's expression grew even darker. "That's not all. I dug deeper into the internal logs after you exposed the governor. There's another security breach, and it's linked to one of Malik's encrypted channels." Dante's heart skipped a beat. "Malik? No way. He saved my life, Jason. He exposed Sloane, helped us take down the governor. Why would he turn on me now? Jason shrugged helplessly. I don't know, but the evidence doesn't lie. Whoever's behind this is using Malik's credentials to access sensitive files, financial records, legal documents, everything. The room seemed to spin around Dante. He wanted to dismiss it, to trust the man who had been his ally through thick and thin. But the pattern was all too familiar. The same way Mark had been framed, the same way Jason's credentials had been used, now Malik was implicated. Dante's mind raced. If Malik was innocent, then someone was playing an even more dangerous game, pitting him against the people he trusted most. But if Malik was guilty, it meant that Dante had been betrayed yet again by someone he had let into his inner circle. I need to talk to him, Dante said, standing up abruptly. Where's Malik now? He's in the conference room, waiting for you, Jason said. But Dante, be careful. If he really is involved in this, he's dangerous. Dante strode through the halls of Blackwood Innovations, his heart pounding. The company was abuzz with activity, employees were celebrating their recent victories, but Dante could barely register the congratulations and smiles directed his way. All he could think about was what awaited him behind the closed doors of the conference room. When he entered, Malik was seated at the long table, casually sipping from a coffee cup. He looked up, a smile spreading across his face. Dante. Hell of a job last night. You really turned the tables on those bastards. Dante didn't return the smile. We need to talk, he said, closing the door behind him. The air in the room grew heavy as the two men sized each other up. What's going on? Malik asked, setting his coffee down. You look like you've seen a ghost. Mark was found this morning, Dante said bluntly. Beaten within an inch of his life. He said someone on my team did it. Malik's eyes flickered with something Dante couldn't quite read. You think I had something to do with it? He asked, his voice calm but with an edge of incredulity. I don't know what to think, Dante replied, crossing his arms. But there's more. Jason found traces of someone using your encrypted channels to access files that only I should have access to. Files that could ruin everything we've worked to rebuild. Malik leaned back, his expression turning serious. Dante, listen to yourself. After everything we've been through, you really think I'd betray you now? Who was it that saved your ass from Sloane's ambush? That's exactly why I'm asking you directly, Dante shot back. If it's not you, then who the hell is doing this? Because they're using your credentials. Malik's jaw tightened. For a moment, Dante thought he saw a flash of anger, but then Malik's expression softened. Dante, you know me better than that. I've been with you from the start. But if someone's framing me, we need to find out who. Before Dante could respond, Maria burst into the room, her face pale. Dante, we've got a situation, she said, holding up her phone. It's all over the news. She turned on the TV mounted on the wall, and they were greeted by a live broadcast from outside Blackwood Innovations. Reporters were swarming the entrance, and the cheering at the bottom of the screen read, Breaking, Blackwood Innovations tied to financial scandal, leaked files reveal corruption. Dante's blood ran cold. What the hell is this? He demanded. It's the files, Dante, Maria said, her voice shaking. Someone released them, but they've been altered to make it look like you've been laundering money through offshore accounts. This is exactly what they planned. Malik turned to Dante, his eyes widening. I swear, Dante, I didn't do this. Someone's trying to frame me, and you. Dante stared at the screen, feeling the ground slip away beneath him. He was caught in a trap with no way out, surrounded by enemies who had turned his closest allies against him. There was only one option left. Maria, shut down all communications and lock down the building, Dante ordered. We're going to find out who's behind this, and we're going to end it. Malik nodded, determination hardening his features. Whoever's behind this just made their final move. Let's show them they picked the wrong fight. As chaos erupted outside, Dante knew that the final showdown was approaching. And this time, he was ready to take the gloves off. The real enemy was still out there, but Dante was done playing defense. It was time to expose the last traitor and reclaim everything that had been stolen from him. The city skyline loomed behind Dante as he stood in the boardroom of Blackwood Innovations. It was early morning, but Dante hadn't slept. The events of the past few hours had kept him on high alert. The relentless media frenzy outside his building, combined with the fabricated evidence that had just gone viral, was threatening to crush everything he had fought so hard to reclaim. Maria, Malik, and Jason were with him, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The windows, usually offering a breathtaking view of the city, now seemed like the walls of a prison closing in around them. "I've locked down all communications," Maria said, her fingers flying across her tablet. "But we're already seeing investors pulling out. The media storm is worse than ever." Dante nodded grimly. "We don't have much time. Whoever released those files was counting on the chaos to destroy us before we could respond." Malik leaned against the table, his face set in a determined expression. "We need to find the source of the leak and expose the real enemy, or it's game over." "Easier said than done," Jason muttered, pacing back and forth. "We've been chasing shadows for days. How do we know we're not being played again?" Dante looked at his team, the people who had stood by him through this nightmare. He had been betrayed, manipulated, and pushed to the brink. But now, as everything hung in the balance, he couldn't afford to trust blindly anymore. The final move had to be his. "All right," Dante said, his voice steadying. "I've been thinking about this all night. We've been reacting to their moves, but now it's time to force their hand." "What do you have in mind?" Malik asked, raising an eyebrow. Dante took a deep breath, the weight of his decision clear in his eyes. "We're going to lure them out. If they've gone this far to destroy me, they won't be able to resist showing up for the kill. But this time, we'll be ready." Dante's plan was risky, but he knew it was the only way. By mid-morning, he had scheduled a press conference at Blackwood Innovations, announcing that he would address the recent allegations head-on. The announcement sent shockwaves through the media. Reporters and news crews swarmed the building, eager to see if Dante would finally confess to the alleged crimes or attempt another desperate maneuver to save his company. As the time for the press conference approached, Dante stood backstage, listening to the hum of the crowd gathering just beyond the heavy curtains. Malik stood beside him, his expression grim but resolute. "You sure about this?" Malik asked, his voice low. "We're walking into a lion's den. If this goes sideways..." "It won't," Dante said, a fire burning in his eyes. "I'm done letting them control the narrative. Today, we take the fight to them." Maria gave Dante a nod from across the room, signaling that everything was in place. The stage was set. It was time for Dante's final gamble. The lights flashed as Dante stepped onto the stage, the roar of the crowd and the click of cameras filling the air. He took his place behind the podium, his face projected on massive screens set up for the live broadcast. He could feel the weight of the world watching, waiting for him to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here today," Dante began, his voice calm and measured. "I know the past few days have been filled with rumors, accusations, and chaos. But today, I am here to set the record straight." As he spoke, Dante noticed movement at the back of the crowd. His heart quickened, this was what he had been waiting for. Malik had stationed undercover security throughout the venue, ready to act at a moment's notice. Dante continued his speech, knowing the true enemy would reveal themselves soon. "Over the last few weeks, my company and I have been the target of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy," Dante continued. "But the truth is finally coming to light. The individuals responsible for framing me, for planting false evidence, and for trying to bring down Blackwood innovations are closer than you think." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Dante paused, letting his words sink in. He scanned the audience, searching for any sign of his enemies. Then, he saw it, a figure slipping toward the side exit, trying to remain inconspicuous. "Malik, now," Dante whispered into the hidden earpiece he was wearing. Without missing a beat, Malik signaled the undercover security team. In seconds, the exits were sealed, and guards moved to intercept the suspicious figure. The crowd erupted in confusion, cameras swiveling to capture the sudden commotion. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dante said, his voice rising above the chaos, "I would like to introduce you to the mastermind behind the conspiracy to destroy me." A spotlight illuminated the figure being dragged toward the stage. To the shock of everyone, it was Jason Parker. His face was twisted in fury as he struggled against the guards. "You fool!" Jason screamed, his voice filled with venom. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The room fell into stunned silence. Dante stared at Jason, disbelief and anger swirling inside him. "Jason, why?" he demanded, stepping away from the podium. Jason spat on the floor, his eyes wild. "You thought you could take on the big players and come out unscathed? You were just a pawn, Dante. And now you've lost." Dante's mind raced, trying to piece it all together. "You were behind the leaks, the attacks, everything. But who are you working for?" Jason laughed bitterly. "You think I'm going to tell you? You may have won today, but the real power behind this won't stop. You'll be ruined, one way or another." Before Jason could say more, Malik stepped forward, producing a small device. "Actually, you've already said enough." He pressed a button, and Jason's confession was broadcasted live to every screen in the room and every news channel streaming the event. Dante took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders as Jason's words sealed his own fate. "Thank you, Jason," Dante said with a cold smile. "You just exposed yourself and your backers. The game's over." Hours later, as the sun set over the city, Dante sat in his office with Maria and Malik by his side. The media frenzy was in full swing, but this time, the tide had turned in his favor. Jason's confession had not only cleared Dante's name but had also exposed a network of corrupt officials and business leaders who had been pulling the strings. "We did it," Maria said softly, a smile of relief spreading across her face. "You've reclaimed everything they tried to take from you." Dante nodded, but his eyes were distant. "For now," he replied. "But they'll be back. The people Jason was working for are still out there. And next time, they won't underestimate me." Malik chuckled. "Let them come, Dante. You've proven you can take anything they throw at you." Dante looked at his team, the people who had stood by him through it all. He knew the battle wasn't over, but for now, he could rest easy knowing that he had fought back and won. The city's lights twinkled outside his window, a symbol of the world he had fought so hard to protect. With a newfound resolve, Dante stood tall. Whatever came next, he was ready.